Welcome friends to another 40k video. Today we're going to look at the birth and origins of the master of mankind, the Emperor, as depicted in Realm of Chaos, the Lost and the Damned. Like another recent video, this is very early lore, so keep that in mind. It may not align with what's going on right now, but it's pretty cool anyway. Since the first primitive humans evolved, the species had developed a special relationship with the warp. The simple hunters and harvesters of early times recognized the natural forces which flowed through all living things like a great river of life, bringing sustenance to the dead earth. Some of these early humans were more sensitive than others to the hidden movements of the warp. They could sense the rhythm of the warp as its energies moved through living things, and sometimes they could predict the future by means of subtle variations in the flow of warp energy. The most successful of these humans assumed the role of shaman, or shaman, depending on how you like to pronounce it, or tribal witch, and now their powers benefit their people. As human numbers increased and human civilization grew away from its natural roots, the particular warp energies created by humans began to dominate the warp. Where the energies of nature were harmonious and benign, those of man were often disharmonious and dangerous. Power, ambition, greed, lust, and 1,000 other human feelings took root in the warp and began to grow as the thoughts and emotions of men became stronger. The natural rhythms of the warp were disrupted and much less accessible to the shamans. Inevitably, the process of civilization severed mankind's link with the natural forces of the warp and created new ones based upon his own character. In time, these disharmonious forces were grown into the chaos powers, or the ruinous powers as they will be known as later. The Emperor was born while the rhythm of the warp still flowed strongly through all natural things. The old shamans were guided by the warp and in their turn guided their people, but even then the growing power of humanity was beginning to make itself felt, and the shamans feared that their knowledge and whole way of life would eventually pass away. The energies they depended upon were becoming increasingly difficult to tap. Worst of all, they were losing the ability to reincarnate. For as long as anyone could remember, when a shaman died, his soul had flown into the warp and bathed in its energies, awaiting renewal in another body. Now the souls were being lost, chased, and consumed by the malignant chaos powers. Terrified for the future of their race, all the shamans of Earth gathered in one place and began the longest and most important debate in the history of humanity, lasting centuries and leading to the birth of the new man, the man that would eventually be the master of mankind. After hundreds of years of debate and research, the shamans came to the conclusion that they were doomed, and that without them the whole race of humanity would soon fall prey to the psychic entities it had created in the warp. At the same time, the disruption of the natural rhythm of the warp would result in the inevitable decline of the whole planet. They divined a future where all of creation will be consumed by mankind's greed and ambition. Although their own power was still strong, the shamans realized that they could survive for only 1 or 2 further incarnations. They were not meant to accept death easily. Many of them could remember the dawn of their race, when in other bodies they had walked under African skies. Having survived so long for millions of years, it was not their way to die without hope or purpose. They therefore decided to pool their own energies by reincarnating in a single body. In their thousands they swallowed poison, and in their thousands they died, and their kind was gone from the earth. Within a year, the man later to be known as the Emperor was born. His mother and father were human. His brothers and sisters were mortals like any other. So when he was born, his parents had no reason to think of him as anything other than a normal child. Only much later would he identify the time of his birth as the 8th millennium BC, or the place as central Anatolia, and by then he would have almost forgotten his early life among the barren mountains, and cold streams. As he grew older, his powers began to manifest themselves, and he gradually remembered the thousands of lives that lay behind him. He was the new man, but he was also the past. His powerful mind could still sift the natural energies of the warp, enter the lives of plants and animals, promote harmony, and ease the suffering of others. And he remembered how he was made to live forever so that he could or would never have to reincarnate, but would survive unchanged for eternity. At last he remembered everything that had led up to his birth, and he left his own people to begin his endless journey around the world and through human history. For 38,000 years, the new man wandered over the earth and through human history. At first he merely observed the world around him, but soon he began to help where he could, using his ancient wisdom to spread efficient government, crop management, animal husbandry, technology and peace. He was always using his influence carefully, adopting the guise of a normal man and without revealing his true nature. That would come later. Over the millennia, the Emperor watched the human race develop. He travelled with many people across the entire globe, watching and helping, sometimes adopting the persona of a great leader or advisor. In times of trouble, he became a crusader, a religious leader, or messiah. At other times, he remained a backstage contributor to events, an advisor to kings, a court magician, a pioneering scientist. Many of the guises he adopted were humble, others became monumental figures of world history or religion. At times of crisis, he would be there, steering the human race along a narrow survival path that he alone was strong enough to see. As the human race prospered, the warp became increasingly disturbed, so that its flow could no longer sustain the planet as it once had. The new man was aware of how the extreme sides of the human character were feeding the chaos powers. Despite his best efforts to promote peace and harmony, the instinctive values of martial honour, ambition, defiance, and self-satisfaction could never be eradicated. Some of the new man's plans were less than successful. Seeds of wisdom often failed to flourish or grew into uncontrollable monstrosities, leading to persecution and war. The chaos powers sensed the presence of the new man and his efforts to curb their own power and growth. Even before they became fully conscious, the chaos powers recognized the Emperor as their great enemy. Khorne was the first of the great powers to wake fully, and an era of wars and conflict raged across the globe. Tzeentch was the next, and nations and politics grew to adulthood with all their implicit intrigues and double dealings. Nurgle was the third to wake, and plague swept across continents, claiming many souls for the Lord of Decay. By the end of the Middle Ages, all three of these chaos powers had awoken to full consciousness, and then Slaanesh would be born because of the Eldar, or the Eldari, however you want to say it. The whole structure of the warp was affected by the growth of the chaos powers, so that everywhere in the galaxy the psychic energies embodied by the chaos powers began to corrupt the natural energies of living things. While Earth was cut off by warp storms, it was also protected from malefic influences of chaos, which were already corrupting much of the human population of the galaxy, both in mind and in body. It was, as the new man knew, only a temporary respite. Once Slaanesh awoke, the incredible disturbance to the warp would disrupt its already enfeebled flow. After almost 40,000 years, it was time for the new man to take a direct hand in the future of humanity. It was time for him to become the Emperor, the master of mankind, the God Emperor. On Earth, the well-ordered civilizations of the past were gone. Government had degenerated into global anarchy. From that anarchy, the Emperor emerged, a saviour in the time of ultimate crisis. He led armies from the Antarctic to Greenland, from deserts of Amazonia to the mountains of Africa. His followers, ever growing in number and strength. His message was clear and vital: unite humanity and bring order to the galaxy. It was a popular message, a long-dormant dream of union, which the human voice took up with unstoppable enthusiasm. Over 100 years before the waking of Slaanesh, the Emperor sought to establish his role over the earth and began to mould its people into a loyal army. He started to plan the reconquest of the galaxy in anticipation of the dispersal of warp storms around the planet. And it is here the Emperor plans the primarchs and the sons of the primarchs. Unfortunately, things did not go quite according to plan. Despite the Emperor's best attempts to shield the Primarch project, from the penetrating eyes of the Chaos powers, they still managed to learn of it. The Primarchs were still in their fetal stage, growing in special amniotic tanks when the Chaos powers combined their energies to spirit them away in a unexpectedly bold move. Even for the Chaos powers, this kidnapping represented a colossal expenditure of energy. The Primarchs were sucked through the warp and scattered on separate human worlds in distant parts of the galaxy. The Chaos powers did not have the resources to destroy the Primarchs, but they did their next best thing, which was to hide them from the Emperor. They were to remain hidden until after the waking of Slaanesh. So in their stead, the Emperor created the Space Marines, and eventually found the Primarchs and started the Great Crusade. And on that crusade, the might of the Imperium grew as they took world after world. The initial conquests concentrated in areas where the Primarchs had been hidden. Using his psychic powers, the Emperor gradually located and found each of his original creations and united them with Space Marine chapters created from their genetic imprints. They seemed none the worse for their brush with chaos, having grown up to be great leaders and warriors among the local populations. In fact, this appearance of normality was to prove deceptive, for some of the Primarchs had become tainted by their early contact with chaos. With the help of the Primarchs, the Great Crusade swept across the galaxy. Humanity rose to the task of rebuilding its ancient heritage, and everywhere the alien oppressor was defeated and driven out, chaos retreated to its own realms, to the zones of warp, real, space overlap, such as the Eye of Terror. But of course, over time, the Horus Heresy starts. And that's where I'm going to end this video, because I think we're getting away from the origins of the Emperor as portrayed here. I hope you enjoyed the content of the video. Drop me a comment down below.